Hello everyone, welcome to Behind the Numbers Around the World, an eMarketer podcast brought to you by Tenuity. It's Tuesday, November the 30th, and I'm your host, UK Principal Analyst Bill Fisher, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to Around the World with holiday shopping. Welcome folks to a Behind the Numbers show that takes you around the world looking at what various countries are doing in the worlds of commerce, media and advertising. Every month we take a topic and I ask a couple of our international experts to fill us in on what's happening in their markets. And this month we are celebrating a birthday. Yes, Behind the Numbers Around the World is 1 year old, and we thought it might be interesting to reminisce and revisit the theme of our November 2020 show, which was about, you guessed it, holiday shopping. This time out, we'll be asking, does Singles Day still matter?
In recent years, like I said, it's slowing down in Singles Day, so it's natural that these e-commerce players in China are sort of looking overseas for growth. But, the event is already kind of taking a foothold in countries like Brazil, Spain, and Russia.
How might another COVID surge in Europe affect holiday shopping plans?
Considering that in-store shopping is going to be problematic in many areas, we do expect strong in-store shopping and buying where circumstances permit, but it's hard even now, about a month ahead of actual Christmas, to know exactly where that's going to be the case.
And how might issues with supply chains impact retailers? In the first half of today's show, I'll be joined by our senior researcher for China and Japan, Man-Chung Cheung, to discuss all things Singles Day. Then in the second half of the show, I'm going to be joined by our principal analyst for Western Europe, Karin von Abrams, who will give us the lowdown on what the run-up to Christmas is going to look like in Europe. But first, let's say hi to our Singles Day specialist, Man-Chung Cheung. Hi, Guy.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
It's great to have you on the show. Now, Man-Chung, when we prepped for this show, I conveniently forgot to mention that because you are first up, you get to guess the Britishism. I'm sure you're familiar with this now. I don't think you've done this though yet, have you?
I haven't, actually. Tell me what it's about.
So basically, I introduce you to a Britishism, a word or phrase that we use over here in the UK that elsewhere you might not know, and you just have a guess. See if you can guess what it means. You up for the challenge?
Sounds fun. Let's do it.
You can pass. If you don't know, just say pass. That's fine. Okay. So today it's a phrase, and the phrase for you today, I'm going to ask you, what would I mean if I told you that I was on my Todd?
On your Todd?
Yeah. The nervous laughter makes me think that you don't have a clue.
Looks like you're sitting on your butt, maybe.
Good guess. Right, let me tell you. This is an example of Cockney rhyming slang, which is a perennial favourite on this show when I do the Britishisms. So Cockney is a East London dialect, and they like to rhyme words over there. So Todd is short for Todd Sloan, which rhymes with alone. So if you are on your Todd, you are on your own. Todd Sloan, by the way, was one of the world's most successful jockeys in the late 1800s. He was actually born in Indiana in the US in 1874, though he spent most of his time racing in the UK, and his life was bookended by being alone. So he was rejected by his parents when he was a baby and was a street urchin, and then he was rejected by the horse racing fraternity in his later life. And of course, the relevance to today's conversation is that we're going to kick off by talking about Singles Day, a shopping holiday targeted specifically at people who are on their Todd. So, Man-Chung, let's get into that conversation. Singles Day, of course, is an unofficial holiday, a shopping day that originated in China and celebrates, in inverted commas, being single, a kind of anti-Valentine's Day, if you will. It falls on the 11th of the 11th, with all the ones representing singles. So it's already happened this year, and it is the biggest holiday shopping day in the world. So, Man-Chung, we've had a tumultuous couple of years. Was Singles Day 2021 a bit of a disappointment? Was it bigger than ever, or was it just a bit different? What was your take on Singles Day this year?
Yeah, so the opinion differs depending on who you talk to, but just be frank, the sort of heydays where sales, what I mean is GMV that's growing at 40-50% is gone, right? So this year, GMV growth came in at 12%, which is way down from last year's 43%. And then you see the lion's share of those sales were generated on Alibaba and JD.com's platform, which makes up about 92% of that total of roughly 139.8 billion US dollars. So Alibaba, to a lot of people, were a little bit of a disappointment. Their growth was just at 8.45%, whereas JD came in at a more respectable 28.5%. Again, we're not going to return to the good old days of 40-50% growth. That's just not possible given the current macroeconomic factors. You see China that is sort of approaching COVID with a zero tolerance approach that is certainly taking out some of the air from offline shopping to, some of the sort of festivities that they put on every year on Singles Day. Like, they would pack an entire stadium with crowds and invited celebrities. As such, you look at the GDP growth, China is down to high single digit of about 8%. And, that would impact certainly salary increases. And looking at the retail sectors, the year-on-year growth is just sort of tapering off to the low single digits. And like you mentioned earlier, the supply chain issues, although it's not as much of an issue in China, we know that, it makes perhaps like majority of the world's consumer electronics and toys. So the manufacturers and brand did stock up a lot, but you do see that certain categories were impacted by the chip shortage, and also consumer love foreign goods. So they are certainly not sort of immune to this global supply chain issue. And the past year, we saw the government aggressively targeting the tech sector, specifically when it comes to antitrust. And that certainly harmed a lot of the e-commerce platform when it comes to there's this kind of, I can say kind of shady practice where brands and retailers were forced to sell exclusively on a certain platform. So that has been outlawed. And also you see the scrutiny on Alibaba's fintech arm Ant Group and their sort of consumer lending practices. And I suspect that's just going to make it harder for people to borrow money for their shopping. So all that combined, plus there are now at least a dozen or more shopping holidays throughout the year in China. And it's not really difficult to find deals these days, right? With the proliferation of live streaming in China as well. So all these just sort of combine to take the sort of air and excitement out of Singles Day.
Yeah, but still, growth is still growth, but it sounds like it was maybe a little bit stickier than in the past for obvious reasons. You mentioned live streaming there, which takes us on to our next point, which I wanted to talk to you about or ask you about. We know how advanced China is when it comes to shopping habits and digital shopping habits. What was new this year on Singles Day? Was there any exciting new tech on show or new behaviors?
Yeah, as we have come to know Singles Day, it has became kind of a launch pad for new technology. And we all have heard of the metaverse, right? The NFTs, all these buzzwords. And certainly the Chinese giants have sort of gotten accustomed to launching these technology, perhaps ahead of their Western counterparts, I would say. Although, no one knows where these sort of metaverse is going in the long term. Brands and their platforms did want to experiment with it. So for this Singles Day, Alibaba launched a virtual art exhibit featuring NFT artworks from partner brands like Burberry, P&G, and Alienware. And there is this virtual, I would say a virtual metahuman character that they have created that acted as a tour guide. So also some brands got into the act, so they launched limited edition of their merchandise during the Singles Day. And when consumers buy those products, they would also get a sort of a digital collection, sort of an online version of that product as an NFT. as well.
Did you buy any NFTs on Singles Day?
Yeah, I'm not really into that yet. You know, I'm not in sort of their target category, I should say, but I'm watching the space for sure.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk briefly about the reach of Singles Day. I know that you attended an event in New York, didn't you, I think?
Yeah, it was hosted by Alibaba.
Okay.
And it was at a sort of upscale fashion retailer.
Okay. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about that and then maybe expand on how much of a foothold Singles Day is getting outside of China?
Yeah, so the event was really for some of the industry friends to kind of experience firsthand live streaming as sort of this really interactive medium, sort of like it's a trend that we're seeing all over the world, right? Retailers are like adopting to live streaming commerce all over the world. It started in China, but they have learned the craft and they have like plans to export this tool to their other overseas businesses. So yeah, you get to see firsthand how interactive it was, how entertaining it was, how much of an interaction it was with the consumers on Alibaba's Tmall platform. They would play games. They would ask the audience to pick a dress that they want the model to try on. They would have interaction, storytelling. Sometimes, the audience would make comments on the model's like hair or like, oh, you have such long legs, that kind of random comment, but it's really entertaining and fun, and the host can, take the audience to around the store, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely like catching on all over the world.
So in terms of how you're seeing Singles Day expand, perhaps in the US, have you seen any specific examples of how Singles Day is beginning to get a bit of a foothold?
So in recent years, like I said, it's slowing down in Singles Day. So it's natural that these e-commerce players in China are sort of looking overseas for growth. But, the event is already, kind of taking a foothold in countries like Brazil, Spain, and Russia, among other countries. First time actually Alibaba is doing an offline event in France. And also there were Singles Day related activities that were being broadcast on TV in Spain as well. And yes, surprisingly, you're seeing some offline retailers in the malls in the US running Singles Day still. So I was also looking online as well, and I saw at least a couple dozen, maybe more, online deals from companies like Coach, Farfetch, and Sephora. So that was a little bit surprising to me.
Yeah, because I'm speaking from personal experience in the UK. I've actually spoken about Singles Day in the media a couple of times a few years ago, and it got a bit of interest, but I've never really seen it take off in any big way. I mean, there was no media around it this year, for example. Is it just specific demographic groups still outside of China that are being targeted?
Yeah, I think, certainly I think like this year you started to hear people talk about it in a serious way. I wouldn't say, if I have to pick a demographic, I would say for younger audiences, although in China it's not really limited to a particular demographic. I think anyone, between the ages of 20 to like 50 would find live streaming commerce appealing. But, it's just coming to the West, like just starting now. So maybe it starts with the younger crowd and then, become more common across different ages eventually.
Okay, watch this space. Well, thanks, Man-Chung. I always enjoy hearing about Singles Day, and I'd love to talk more, but it's time to hear from our sponsor. And then when I return, I'll be talking to Karin about the pre-Christmas shopping period in Europe. We'll be right back.
When it comes to performance marketing, you need an agency that understands balance of brand and demand, art and science, of data and people, experience and innovation. You need a marketing agency that brings it all together without losing sight of what really matters: performance. Rethink Performance with Genuity, the largest independent performance marketing firm across streaming TV and the triopoly of Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Find out how at rethinkperformance.com.
Welcome back, and also welcome to our principal analyst for Western Europe, Karin von Abrams. Hi, Karin.
Hi, Bill. Great to be joining you.
Great to have you on the show. I'm guessing you knew what I was talking about when I said I was on my Todd.
I did, although I have to say I've been tripped up in the past by some of your questions, despite having lived in the UK for a long time. But that one I would have guessed. So there we are.
Yeah, I didn't know the background to it, though. I always learn something, even though they are Britishisms that I know. I tend not to know the background. Anyway, let's talk about the holiday shopping period in Europe. And let's have a bonus Britishism for our US listeners here. Over in Europe, when you mention the holidays, that usually translates into the summer break that we have. We talk about holidays instead of vacations. But we are, of course, in this instance, talking about the seasonal holiday shopping period here, which essentially covers the run-up to Christmas. So, Karin, we are on to something of a sequel in large parts of Europe at the moment. COVID, the return, or COVID Strikes Back, whatever sequel you prefer. Case rates are rising rapidly in many countries on the continent, though not everywhere. What sort of impact is all this likely to have on shopping plans this holiday season?
Well, you ask an interesting question there. As you point out, much of Europe is seeing these COVID surges. As yet, it's not quite so pronounced in the UK, but you may know Austria locked down from the 22nd of November. Greece has brought in new controls. The situation is very gloomy in Germany, of course, a major market. The World Health Organization has issued some grim warnings about the next weeks and months. And therefore, we're seeing, in some ways, as you were pointing out, a sort of recurrence of last year when there was, of course, an enormous need and drive to get online to do holiday shopping, to do Christmas and New Year shopping. And although we had thought that wouldn't be the case this year, it does seem to be that the timing is just very, very bad in terms of the coincidence of the holiday shopping period with this COVID surge. Very, very strange. I mean, that Europe is now apparently the epicenter of COVID globally, and not something we wanted to see. So interestingly, I think a lot of the online retailers who had to scramble last year to bring more business online are probably well placed in terms of perhaps back end. But you were speaking earlier, I think, with Man-Chung about some supply chain issues, and those are definitely very prominent in Europe.
Yeah, and speaking personally from the UK, there's the added complication of Brexit. I can't get by a podcast without mentioning Brexit.
Nor should you. It's very important here.
Indeed. So, we have that added complication in terms of supply chain issues, getting things across the border. We know that supply chain issues are a global issue, but how big are the issues likely to be in Europe specifically, and how are retailers maybe preparing to cope with the coming supply chain problems?
I think the issues are very substantial. It depends to an extent on the sector, of course, of the retailer, as you would expect. A number of the things that are scheduled, as it were, to be out of stock or to have very low stock this year are, unfortunately, a lot of the products that are also popular gifts. So that would be fashion and accessories, sporting goods, consumer electronics, toys, other, products for children and babies. All of these are under stress, as it were, in terms of the supply chain. Also, considering that in-store shopping is going to be problematic in many areas, we do expect strong in-store shopping and buying where circumstances permit, but it's hard even now, about a month ahead of actual Christmas, to know exactly where that's going to be the case. A number of the open-air markets in continental Europe have had to shut, for example. We thought that wouldn't be the case. So even in-store retailers are going to have problems, I think. So both online and offline, there are going to be major issues. I was interested to know also that, for example, there are shortages of things that we don't immediately think of in terms of what retailers need and what they need in order to get their products to consumers one way or another. It turns out that there are actual significant shortages of things like plastic and cardboard around the world. In Germany, for example, there's a major major shortage of paper. So first of all, many publishers are saying, oh, if you're planning on buying books for holiday gifts, you need to get in there and do that now, because we don't know if supplies of, best-selling volumes are going to hold up. Also, if you think about the problem with a paper shortage and cardboard and how that may impact the online delivery, service to consumers, it could be really an extraordinary problem.
So with regard to supply chain issues, Karin, you were talking about something quite interesting in terms of the relationship between Europe and China. What's happening there in terms of supply chain issues?
Yes, well, it's very interesting. One thing I noticed is that this year there have been a number of freight trains coming from China, from the main manufacturing areas, straight into Germany. It takes about 2 weeks, a bit more than 2 weeks for these trains to arrive. But these freight trains are bringing a lot of the manufacturing goods that the Chinese know are wanted here in Europe. And it's very important for the exporters that they get to these markets if they possibly can. And of course, important to the retailers, at the West, in our European corner, that those things do arrive. Interestingly enough, these train services that run from Shenzhen into Germany typically, and then goods are spread out from there, they cut the transport cost by about 30% compared with sending things by sea. It's actually quicker. And they only cost about 20% of what air freight would cost for the exporters. So that's a win-win, I think, and something we're going to see more of. But this was a service only really launched in Q3 of 2020, so still very early days.
The online and offline dynamic could be interesting this year. I mean, in advance of this call, I was taking a look at the penetration rates for retail e-commerce across Europe. So how much of total retail sales are conducted digitally or online. I know about the UK, it's a pretty advanced market. Over 36% of total retail sales in 2021 were digital. Second only to China. China's, as we've already spoken to Man-Chung about, it's around 50% already. Those numbers aren't quite as high in the rest of Europe, are they? So what might that digital and physical dynamic look like this year? Might it provide more impetus for online, or will those potential shortages in things like cardboard maybe nix that potential growth?
I think there's still enormous potential for more online shopping, especially as COVID looms in a variety of ways. It doesn't look as though in any part of Europe there is going to be a sort of a lessening of concern about, COVID between now and the holiday itself. As you were pointing out, the sort of share of e-commerce sales as opposed to total resale sales in key markets like France and Germany, it's actually only about 11% this year overall. And as you were saying, in the UK, 36%, over 36%. So a major change there. But I did see figures from the Handelsverband Deutschland, a German industry source that does a lot of stats gathering. And their estimate for 2021 is that 23 million euros are going to be spent online in Christmas, but that will be more than a quarter of the total e-commerce sales for the year. So that total is estimated at about 87 million euros. So as you would expect, the holiday share will be more than the total annual share.
Yeah, that makes sense. So whilst we're talking about the holiday share, everything that we've spoken about so far, what does this mean, or what is it going to mean for the shopping cadence this year? Have people been shopping much earlier? Has discounting been going on for longer? What's your take on that?
Yes, I think anyone in the UK or indeed elsewhere in Europe has been seeing massive discounting. I've been seeing this all over in my personal environment, but also this is happening starting with what is now Black Friday week officially, and that was last week, in fact. But it's no longer just Black Friday, which was already a thing in Europe anyway, but very widespread early discounting, Cdiscount in France, Otto Group and Kaufhof in Germany, John Lewis in the UK, Amazon across the region. Between the 19th and the 29th of November was Black Week, and that concept was in fact borrowed by a wide range of stores all over Europe. There were some interesting innovations. Carrefour in France was offering a 3-hour live shopping show, apropos live streaming, as you were speaking about with Man-Chung, on the 22nd, with some offers available only during that live stream. So very, very early discounting. And also there are signs that they're very, very early shopping. There's a Salesforce study showing that the UK consumers apparently were the earliest to start shopping for the holiday this year, and also buying more online than any country. Interestingly, also buying more online on sort of places that offered marketplace format. So that's more likely to be the case for people buying in the UK than in France, Germany, for example. But yes, very early shopping, longer sales periods, very dramatic discounts as well, I think. It seems to me that both shoppers and retailers are really attempting to get as much done, as it were, in terms of this, their holiday tasks. They're trying to meet their needs on, all parties trying to meet their needs much earlier than they have done in the past.
Yeah, well, as a consumer, I'm guilty on all charges there. I've done lots of shopping, lots online and lots on marketplaces. Okay, that's all we have time for today on Behind the Numbers Around the World. Thanks to my guests, Man-Chung and Karin, and thanks to all of you for listening, whether as a group or on your Todd. Tune in tomorrow for another episode of our new show, the Behind the Numbers Brand Anatomy, where every 2 weeks our own Jeremy Goldman speaks to a different brand to find out what's keeping them up at night and what they learned from a recent campaign of theirs. Tomorrow, Jeremy speaks to Harold Clarier, the EVP and President of Global Advertising at social news app Reddit. I'll see you next month for another episode of Behind the Numbers Around the World, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Tenuity.